Disruptive.
America that I fought.
Weird thing to happen. Hello, one and all. Welcome to this edition of Kitz Corner. Hope you're having a fantastic day so far. So, Roseanne Barr, who everybody knows, I think. I think it's pretty self-explanatory who she is. She was, had the sitcom Roseanne for so many years. Comedian, writer, had her show canceled back in 2018 when she made some tweets. There was a lot of controversy around her. Made an appearance on Piers Morgan's talk show or news show in the UK, and she talks about the weaponization of comedy, the weaponization of satire in this age of woke ideology, and the fact that we have demonized ourselves of comedy and humor and demonized, satire as a means of projecting information in a comedic way. I think that's one of the most genius ways we can influence, information, people to challenge the status quo is through satire, through comedy. Like, that's the basis of, all of that. And she goes into detail about that. But then she also makes a critical point about Ukraine that's pretty profound. And considering that a lot of celebrities are either on the 100% kissing up to the establishment side, the CIA records of supporting the Ukrainian Nazis in this, demonization of its people in Russia, or they stay silent about it. It's interesting to hear someone actually speaking on behalf of what this all means. So take a look at this.
The sort of apoplexy that people bring to jokes, to humor, to sarcasm, to irony, all these things. And I really despair that the very essence of comedy, for example, is being expunged from human life.
Yes, it is. Yeah, well, you should despair, Piers, and so should anybody who has a brain or, any humanity whatsoever, or any connection to any other human beings on earth. They should despair too. I say that they are weaponizing stupidity, and people have sunk to such a level that they can't handle satire, because satire is when you take two disparate subjects and bring them together to defamiliarize reality, such as a poet does with words. Defamiliarize reality. And they cannot hold two disparate ideas in their head at the same time, because they're fed bullshit 24/7 over the media. And I'm about to go crazy sitting here on the earphone hearing the stuff you all are saying about the Ukraine. I'm about to have a heart attack, but I'm not even going to go into it. I'm from the Ukraine. The Ukrainian, there is a large faction of Nazis. I don't know if you know this, but there's a large amount of Nazis in the Ukraine, and they actually killed my whole family. I'm from the Ukraine, and they marched my entire family, grandmothers, great-grandparents, 10 siblings out into the forest and buried them alive in the Ukraine. So I don't understand why everybody's Ukraine. Well, I do understand, and that's also what terrifies me. People better wake up and do some research on their own instead of buying what comes across on the screen. And I try to shake them up, Piers. You're goddamn right I do. I try to shake them up and crack their mind control programming. I do it for God.
Well, here's, Roseanne, what I would say to that. I don't agree with you about a lot of the stuff you said about Ukraine. I know what you said, and you're perfectly entitled to your views. I would say in relation to the suggestion that they're all a bunch of Nazis.
You haven't seen the swastikas on those
Roseanne,
soldiers' arms?
The President Zelensky himself is Jewish, so obviously he is de facto not a Nazi.
I know, but he's not a good one. Are all Jews the same? For God's sake, talk about anti-Semitic. Just because the guy's a Jew doesn't mean he likes Jews or that he's doing anything good for the Jews. I mean, so what? Who cares what anybody is? That was the whole point of my tweet. Just because they're skin folk don't mean they're kin folk. You know what I mean? Just because they're the same color as you don't mean they ain't trying to lock your ass up. Wake up, people! Snap out of it.
Okay, listen.
Damn. You know, it is what you said is correct. Like, what made me realize that this whole Russian like, you know, you go onto social media, for example, and when it comes to foreign affairs, when it comes to war, when it comes to anything, the first thing I usually do, honest to God, the first thing I do is to go on to Twitter, go on to Instagram, go on to TikTok, and look for, like, random Ukrainian accounts. Look at random, you know, Syrian or Libyan accounts or anything like that. People that are actually on the ground as the war is going on. And what I see in those social media posts, what I see in those videos that are taken of what's happening in Ukraine does not line up to anything they're saying in the news. It is not at all line up to anything what they're saying in the news. So either one of them has to be wrong. And considering the fact that the news is broadcasting in a corporate studio somewhere, probably in New York or LA or big time city, and they don't have boots on the ground, they're not seeing it out front in the open, they're not on the front lines of the war, I know for a fact that something's up with them, that they're being fed this propaganda, probably from consulting firms and think tanks, to make them project this anger and this anguish of manufacturing this war, to continue on this war. As Julian Assange always points out, this is a continuous war. This is a war so that war profiteers can market off this and sell you the idea of aggression so they can profiteer off the death and blood and disparity that people have been suffering throughout this. And it's amazing. Roseanne brings up that point about it. And Piers Morgan is trying, you know, because he's on corporate news. He's like, yeah, well, yeah, I respect your opinion, but you know, you're allowed to have your views, but I don't exactly agree with it. It's amazing. It's amazing. Let me watch. Let's play that again. Play that part of it again.
My whole family. I'm from the Ukraine, and they marched, my entire family, grandmothers, great-grandparents, 10 siblings out into the forest and buried them alive in the Ukraine. So I don't understand why everybody's Ukraine. Well, I do understand, and that's also what terrifies me. People better wake up and do some research on their own instead of buying what comes across on the screen. And I try to shake them up, Piers. You're goddamn right I do. I try to shake them up and crack their mind control programming. I do it for God.
Well, here's, Roseanne, what I would say to that. I don't agree with you about a lot of the stuff you said about Ukraine. I know what you said, and you're perfectly entitled to your views. I would say in relation to the suggestion that they're all a bunch of Nazis.
You haven't seen the swastikas on those
Roseanne,
soldiers' arms.
The President Zelensky himself is Jewish, so obviously he is de facto not a Nazi.
So Piers Morgan's only argument to disagree with this, well, Zelensky is Jewish, so if he's Jewish, then obviously he's not a Nazi. Does that mean anything? I mean, Adolf Hitler was a vegetarian. Does that mean all vegetarians are fascists? Does that mean all vegans are fascists? Like, does it really matter that point? Yes, he's Jewish, but he's also a warlord. He's also a puppeteer of the global war empire, Piers. It's obvious. It's out front in the open. Mainstream media even has come up to the point of saying this. They announced back before the Russian invasion that Ukraine was a corrupted nation. It was a corrupted nation because we installed that government. We overthrew their democracy to put in this puppeteer government and allow a comedian to rule as supreme leader while enabling neo-Nazis to become the national military that's demonizing Ukrainians. And we know this because of the background history that people can look at. If they look at the history of Ukraine, if they go and look at, you know, professors and intellects and the studies and research and all the profounding history of this nation and how it came to be and all the stuff about the Minsk Accord. You look at Ukraine on Fire, for example, Oliver Stone's documentary they put together of this buildup towards the invasion. You would know that this is all manufactured. This is all manufactured. This is not Russia one day decided to come into this country. It was all purposely done. All purposely done. And like Roseanne said, you just have to look at it. You have to sit down and actually look behind the screen, behind what you're being told, to figure out exactly what's going on. That's why there was such a massive censorship campaign, and it continues to have a massive censorship campaign, because people are being silenced out of the true information about war. Because the more knowledge we know about it, the more that we understand about the war machine, and we would want to stop the war machine. We would rise against the war machine. So they're trying to silence out critics by, you know, fear-mongering them, by censoring them out, by firing them. There was professors and athletes that weren't allowed to do their thing. There was comedians that weren't allowed to perform their craft because there were critics of the efforts of the Ukrainian war. It was just insane. And it's just amazing that, you know, from people like Sean Penn or Ben Stiller to give Zelensky an Oscar for all the stuff that they've done, and now to see this, Roseanne Barr speaking out, it's amazing.
I know, but he's not a good one. Are all Jews the same? For God's sake, talk about anti-Semitic. Just because a guy's a Jew doesn't mean he likes Jews or that he's doing anything good for the Jews. I mean, so what?
Let's not forget Jon Stewart gave an award at Disneyland to a Nazi. Jon Stewart, who's a Jewish comedian and a satirical artist, who was basically what I call the founding father, even though he didn't actually start The Daily Show, but I consider him the founding father of The Daily Show, that entire craft, the brilliance of that show, gave an award to a Nazi, to an actual Nazi, awarded him at Disneyland. And Piers Morgan is still trying to defend that by saying that, well, if Zelensky is Jewish, then this whole entire thing about Nazis is discredited. That makes absolutely no sense.
Who cares what anybody is? That was the whole point of my tweet. Just because they're skin folk don't mean they're kin folk. You know what I mean? Just because they're the same color as you don't mean they ain't trying to lock your ass up. Wake up, people! Snap out of it!
Okay, listen, like I said, you're uncensored, so you're perfectly entitled to your views. I'm entitled to a different view. I'm sure you would accept.
What a pansy-ass Piers Morgan is. Honest to God. What a freaking pansy-ass. Listen, you're entitled, you're uncensored, and I'm just going to sit here and listen to my producers. I'm just going to let you do your thing, but, you know, like, seriously, all you have to do, I'm sure you got thousands of writers and assistants and production managers and PAs on board right now. Tell them to go on their phones right now and look up the information. Do a little fact-checking to see if Roseanne was actually right. And here, we could do some fact-checking ourselves, because remember this? NBC proved this. NBC, out of all places, told us that Ukraine actually has a Nazi problem. This is before the invasion. This is before all the war efforts came out. They have told us that there is neo-Nazis in Ukraine that we're funding, that we're arming, that we're supporting. Just like we did with Al-Qaeda, just like we do with ISIS. We create terror groups so that we can fight the terror. That's how we manufacture these wars, so we can manufacture a business, a global business empire of war. And that's how war profiteers are made. We manufacture this business because peace and prosperity doesn't make wholesome dollars for the evil, nefarious, blood-sucking ticks that rule us. That's why they have to manufacture these terrorist groups. That's why they have to segregate people. That's why they have to manufacture this aggression and yell at people and say that this leader is evil and this leader is good and evil, and create these like comic book scenarios. So that we go in and stop it and try to bring democracy and humanity and get some sanity in the world. Oh my God, such evilness in the world. While the evil is the one that are telling us who's the evil one. The irony of that. Or how about this? I've shown this numerous amount of times, so I just want to show this again. How in Canada, our news media did a whole report about this. This is back in, I think, 2019, when City News announced that, hey, the Canadian government and their military is training alongside neo-Nazis. They're not saying that now, but we knew about this in 2019, and then all of a sudden, once Russia decided enough was enough, I'm going to go in, all this just went away. All this just went away. Now apparently the neo-Nazis that we were supposed to be questioning and critiquing and fearful of are now become the heroes because of the manufactured narratives that they're trying to push and the silence of a discourse that there is to this. But let me show this again.
A meeting with one of the paramilitary units raised to fight off the Russian invasion of Ukraine's eastern provinces. One problem: that unit, the Azov Battalion, has been linked to neo-Nazism, and the Canadian military knew.
Велику, могутню і соборну. Слава нації!
An Ottawa Citizen report says Canadian forces in Ukraine produced a briefing in 2017 saying members of the Azov Battalion identified themselves as Nazis. But the June 2018 meeting happened anyway, with a Canadian forces colonel and
I'm sure, you know, schmucks like Piers Morgan will look at that and go, well, but they're fighting for their freedom and their country and their military and they can't be Nazis because Nazis were back in the 40s and we don't have Nazis now. This was proven by our military, by our intelligence. They confirmed that there was neo-Nazis. It's out in the open. Look at their social media accounts. The head Nazi, the head ringleader of the Azov Battalion announced that he wants a one-world Nazi domination. He announced that openly to the public. It's not hard to prove it. It's not hard to prove. It's not hard to fact-check.
Attending. The battalion published pictures on social media saying Canadian representatives expressed their hopes for, quote, further fruitful cooperation. In a statement, the Department of National Defense says they are strongly opposed to the glorification of Nazism and all forms of racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, intolerance, and extremism, adding, our official position remains that we are not, nor will we be providing support to Azov and affiliated entities. Brad Galloway.
And what changed? What changed? Did NATO just, you know, had a change of heart? Did the Azov, you know, change their ways? Or did the U.S. empire, along with NATO and all the military contractors that have a global presence around the world, pressured countries, blackmailed countries, saying, if you don't side with us, you might have some destruction of your own? Because that's what happened. NATO blackmailed all of its allies by saying, you don't align yourself with our destruction, you don't kiss up and you don't send more of your GDP towards more militarism around the world, oppressing humanity around the world, something's going to happen with your humanity. They blackmailed country after country to align themselves with this. NATO is not a trusted organization. It's a global, evil, nefarious empire that needs to be taken out, that needs to be gone. All these countries need to get themselves out of this alliance, because this alliance has deeply corrupted since its start.
hate, bias, and extremism, has studied the Azov Battalion. He says that while some neo-Nazi groups prefer to be discreet with their imagery, the Azov Battalion is more forthright. German news found members of the unit sporting SS symbols and swastikas, and Azov prominently places the wolf's hook and black sun, two symbols favored by the Nazis, on its crest.
Maybe there's a wing of them that want to tone it down a little bit so it's playable in North America. You know, that could be one aspect of it, but I think with the way they're doing things over in Europe, I think it's as advertised.
Galloway says what concerns him most is the Canadian government underestimating the reach of groups like the Azov Battalion. Similar to Canadians who join ISIS, Galloway warns that alienated far-right Canadians may see the Azov Battalion as a chance to turn ideology into action.
Some risk I see is that guys giving up on the movement in North America and saying, well, we should organize and go to Eastern Europe where we can actually do something, we can make a difference. And that's I think a huge risk.
How Piers Morgan and others cannot see this, cannot obviously see that this was completely manufactured, that we are arming the worst people ever to do catastrophic damage to innocent people of both Russia and Ukraine and around the world, actually, to continue on this militarized war empire, and how this is distraught against the world, how this is not helpful to anybody, how this is how we have the birth of terrorists, and this is exactly the step-by-step playbook of how these wars begin. All these manufactured wars are caused by the alliances of these global empires and the military contractors and the profiteers and the bankers and BlackRock and Vanguard and all these corporate alignments of the military, you know, manufacturing these wars, manufacturing the aggression, sending arms and weaponry and military and surveillance and money to orchestrate this. How can nobody see this? Again, as Roseanne points out, it's mind control. It's a global mind control. It's suppression of important information, vital information, that you are constantly fed the manufactured narrative, and you get sucked in to the mass disinformation campaign that somehow all this is going to save Ukraine. This is going to save us in the long run. That, you know, costing our livelihood even further up and making worse of ourselves is going to be worth it in the long run, because Russia's going to be taken down eventually. Just unbelievable. And the fact that they knew about this, you know, it's almost eerily similar to when they knew about Osama bin Laden. You know, all the CIA training that we gave them, and all the weaponry and all the missions and cluster bombs that we gave them, saying that, oh, maybe it's a bad thing to align themselves, and someday they're gonna get us back. Oh, that's crazy talk. Well, guess what happened? I guess we should have maybe listened. I guess we should have maybe realized that arming people and then brainwashing them to go kill and slaughter for capital gains is not an effective move. It's not purposeful for humanity. And this is what it's led to. Because now this corporate brainwashing, to paraphrase what Roseanne said, has led to stuff like this. Like I mentioned about Jon Stewart awarding a Nazi an award, a Jewish comedian awarding a Nazi an award at Disneyland. And it's also led to this: why Stanford students host a group of neo-Nazis. Stanford. These are highly educated ivory eggheads who know better, who can go to their libraries and look up Ukraine, look up Russia, look up all the stuff that's happened in Eastern Europe. They have the mass amount of resources to find out what's going on. But they're going to host a bunch of neo-Nazis. Why? Because I'm sure MSNBC told them that they're heroes. I'm sure that they got told by their, college professors that got a leg up from some lobby group that's funneling money towards the school. I'm sure some NGO organization collaborated with the school to push this forward. Stanford students host a group of neo-Nazis. That's going to be one interesting kegger. Oh my God. And I still see this to this day. I still see, people on Twitter with the Ukrainian flag in their profile and so on and so forth, thinking that they're doing good. Like, just like they did with trying to say that Syria, if we go do regime change in Syria, take down Bashir al-Assad, it's going to save the Syrian people. No, we're still in Syria. It's nothing to do with the people. It has to do with the oil. It has to do with the resources. We're not interested in saving humanity because these global capitalist ghouls don't give two shits about humanity. They don't give two shits about anybody except for money, except for their profits. They're profit-hungry people, and they will do anything, including killing and sacrificing people in a mass amount for their own profits, for their own gains. That is what the war machine is about, ladies and gentlemen, and that's something we were warned in the 50s. But Dwight D. Eisenhower said in his last speech, beware the military-industrial complex. And this is how powerfully corrupted they are, that a bunch of ivory egghead students at Stanford, who should know better, is hosting parties with a bunch of neo-Nazis. Because it's good. It's the good for humanity. It's soulful. Sean Penn told me, and why would Sean Penn would lie to me? He's such a good humanitarian once upon a time ago. Ben Stiller gave the leader an Oscar. He's a Jewish man. Piers Morgan knows better. He's a Jewish man. Why would he fund himself with Nazis? Come on. Come on, Roseanne. You're uncensored and you're allowed to have your views and stuff, but don't be too truthful on this network. I need to keep this job. I need to keep this manufactured consent going so I can keep this show going. What a putz he is. What an absolute putz. And once again, a comedian outwits the journalist. Just like how the good old days of the Daily Show were. It's amazing how a comedian can be the most accurate journalist, and the most accurate journalist turns out to be the funny one. Because it's hysterical that Piers Morgan cannot see this out in the open. With the mass amount of resources he has. As opposed to Roseanne Barr, who is a comedian. But she knows a thing or two because she does her research. Just like me, just like anybody else. It's not that hard to figure out. It's just hilarious.
This segment of Kitz's Corner is sponsored by CBD Oil Direct, Canada's most trusted source for high-quality lab-tested natural therapeutic products for people and pets. Whether it's treating pain, anxiety, insomnia, or just looking to live a more vital life, there's a therapeutic solution for you. Use the link below and get free express shipping with purchases over $150.